Good morning everyone! On this blessed day I will be attempting to build a flip-top workbench. I have come to a realization that my garage is too tiny at just measly 120 square feet. Therefore, in order to save the surface space, I need to make sure that I minimize how much surface space my tools take up. Thus, I will be venturing out on a journey to combine my tools with the flip-top workbenches. To be honest, I have no idea what I'm doing, but here goes nothing. First step was to cut up 12 pieces of lumber. Following that, I did something completely pointless. I used glue to glue up the frame, and once the glue has dried, I proceeded to accidentally drop one of the frames, causing it to shatter at glue points. So that is where I realized that for this project I would either have to do joinery or use screws. Since I was too short on time to do joinery, I decided to just use screws. But before I proceed to use screws, I just quickly needed to drill holes through which my pipe would pass in order to make the top flippable. My son handled it pretty well here and it was an easy job. Next time though, I will probably use Frostner bits since removing intact pieces of wood from the hole bit was hard and took longer than actually making the holes themselves. And since I decided to use screws, I thought why not learn how to make pocket holes using pocket hole jig. So as you see here, I'm trying to now make the same frame that I glued up by using pocket hole jig, and I proceed to burn my hands. I do not know if it's the jig that is just bad, or if it's simply me not knowing how to properly use the jig, but the whole thing was smoking, and on top of it I ended up with 2 burn marks on my hand from not realizing that the jig is hot. As I kept at it, one of the holes developed a problem where the drill bit would get stuck and when I would try to pull it out. It really just might be my poor skills, but I'm definitely not a fan of this Mastercraft pocket hole jig. Once frames were ready, I tried attaching them together. However, that is where my second mistake comes in. Those middle pieces that I'm attaching, they're completely useless. I was hoping to turn these middle pieces into a shelf by attaching a piece of plywood to it, but it wasn't meant to be. Later on in the video, you will see me removing them because they simply prevent me from flipping the top itself. My math was way off on this one, but it is good, since this was going to be my least used flip-top workbench. Also, this is where I start realizing that making pocket holes is much more easier on a piece of wood that wasn't attached to anything yet. Also, I have no idea how deep to attach the screws because if I push it too deep, the wood just cracks. If you guys have any advice on what I'm doing wrong here, I would really appreciate it. This whole process is really painful for me. Never knew just how difficult pocket holes could be. Anyways, now that the frame was ready, I just quickly assembled the frame for the flip top itself and I was finally done with pocket holes. Hallelujah! Have to say, pocket holes aren't my favorite. And now it was time to attach wheels to the frame. For this, I quickly cut a piece of plywood to the dimensions, secured the plywood to the frame with screws. I contemplated to also use glue with the screws, but chose to just skip that. And then I added the wheels. For those of you liking order to chaos, you will notice that the wheels are attached together in a very messy pattern. I did want to make it neat, but at the last moment I decided to just make it chaotic, just for fun. These wheels are rated for 300 pounds, so they should be able to easily handle 150 pounds I will be throwing on them. Not to mention top is birchwood, so it should also be strong enough. Now that the frame was ready, it was time to assemble the top. For top, I was worried that the constant vibrations from machines would cause screws to get loose, so instead of using screws, I opted out to use bolts. My thinking is that if bolts get loose, I simply tighten them again. Do let me know your opinion on this. I truly do not know what I'm doing, so this is all guesswork and hoping that it would work. But that's what I do. I make sure that the top is held together by 8 3/8 of an inch bolts. One notice to anyone attempting this, and something I haven't realized and thoroughly suffered with, is mark the sides of your pieces by drawing on them. I didn't mark anything, so once I took the pieces apart, I couldn't figure out how they went back together. It was a huge pain putting it back together, and you can clearly see me struggle with it. Even after I drew the lines at the end, I still somehow went full stupid and proceeded to ignore the lines. Well, once I had my top ready, it was time to install my first tool on it. It was going to be the grinder. In the past, I have attempted and gloriously failed at making a jig for sharpening my chisels, so I ended up buying Woodworking sharpening system, worth every penny by the way. And that's what I installed at first because once I put the grinder, there will be not enough space for anything else. As I'm installing the grinder, I had to dangle it over the edge. The reason for it is because the bolts actually punctured a hole through my workbench, so I asked my son to help me out a bit and hold on to the grinder. That thing is heavy, but he managed. While doing it, I was genuinely terrified that at any moment he might accidentally get tired and drop the whole thing, but we survived somehow. Once I secured the grinder to the plywood, I attached it to the flip top with 3 bolts. To my surprise, 3 bolts were enough to hold all that weight on the grinder without it falling off. I actually flipped it upside down off the camera and it worked. So I was very happy with how it was turning out. If you guys are aware of some other way I could have accomplished this, I would be very grateful for your input. In order to make the top flippable, I was going to pass a metal rod through it. I bought adapters to attach rod to the frame, but I didn't consider the orientation in which they are going to be attached to the frame. So in order to accommodate the adapters and make sure they would be flush with the frame, I had to quickly make a groove in the frame for adapter to fit. This is also my first time using a palm router. Gotta say, it is way more fun to use than a regular router for things like this. I really enjoyed this process and it was very fun, although extremely sawdusty. My GoPro failed to record the dangerous part here, but pretty much what I did is use 4 clamps set to push apart and slowly lower the flip top onto the opening of the frame. My son helped out a lot, but I do realize that the mistake here could have been disastrous. Then I lined up holes and hammered the rod all the way through. Once done, I screwed one adapter on, hammered all the way through, then used the wrench to screw the other adapter on tightly, and following that I secured the adapters to the frame with screws. This actually resulted in a very sturdy frame, convincing me that the middle pieces of lumber I attached were completely unnecessary. This is when I realized that if I tried to take the clamps off, the whole thing would start violently spinning. So before taking off clamps, I went to the store and bought 2 biggest latches they had in stock. My intent was to secure the whole thing with latches. There are probably better ways to do it, but this is what I thought of at the moment. Only downside was that the pieces didn't line up too well, so I had to once again use my palm router to plane the wood. And I'm not complaining at all. Using palm router is very fun. This allowed me to secure the latch on with some light drilling and screwing. And to my surprise, one latch was more than enough. It could easily hold the grinder, plus me pushing down on it relatively hard. I didn't even realize how powerful latches are. Now that the piece could be properly secured, I wanted to see how flipping it would work. And this is where I realized that the middle pieces of wood were absolutely useless. I attempted to lower them, and even then I realized that there isn't enough clearance to properly flip what I had constructed. I really didn't want to throw it out, so I simply took them all the way down. It is absolutely horrible approach, and even now I'm contemplating removing them completely. But for now I will give it a passing score. After all, this is my first attempt at this. We were almost at the finish line. Last part was to attach a finger joint jig to the other side and bolt everything up so that it is super tight and sturdy. So that's what I do. The Porter cable finger joint jig does have 2 holes on each side to be attached to the surface, but I think 1 bolt per side is more than enough. It is not heavy enough so metal won't really bend, and if I need to take things apart it would be much faster. One thing I did mess up badly though is the last screw. The hole didn't line up properly and it was slightly off, so I kept hammering at it and hammering. Eventually I switched to metal hammer, and with enough force I completely broke the plywood below. It just shattered. I attempted to fix it with bolting it down, but I have no idea if it made any difference at all. Thankfully, it won't affect performance of my flip top bench, so I'm content about it, even though it doesn't look too good. And with that, I thought I was done. But then I realized that there is no way for me to secure the top when I'm using the finger joint jig. I didn't want to reuse the latch already installed because I wanted excuse to use palm router some more. So I took palm router and had fun planing another surface to install the latch on. I even made it line up with the one already installed. With the finger joint jig, I couldn't install it at the front because then the jig would not be usable. So it had to go to the back. But it did line up quite nicely. And with that, I was finally done! This is the first time I did anything as huge as this with so many moving parts. Let me know how you guys think I did. I was pretty happy with the results. But I would like to hear your opinion on what I could have done better and improved on. I plan to make another one for my planer and Mitre Saw. but I will wait until summer for that. I apologize that this video took a bit too long to release, but I had 7 hours of footage to process into usable chunks, which ended up being 2.5 hours long. There were a lot of errors and lots of things going wrong every step of this build, but I learned a lot. I even feel like my next build will work perfectly. Well, hopefully it will. If you guys know how I can improve on this, I would love to know. I really do not know what I'm doing and would love to know what to do for version 2 of this build. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw as much as I enjoyed making it, please consider leaving a like and maybe subscribing. I try to release a video every week. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you this Saturday. Bye bye!